I'm going to talk about muscular adaptations to resistance training. And sorry that this video was a little late in getting out. And then also, I apologize in advance in case there's any crazy noises. I'm having to record from home this morning. And so, with a bunch of kids running around home from school because it's Sunday, who knows what's going to happen. So, here are the 4 objectives for the day. So, we're going to talk about hypertrophy and hyperplasia, and then how we have muscular adaptations during anaerobic training. Okay, so muscle hypertrophy, well, first of all, what does hypertrophy mean? And when you hear the word hypertrophy, just think something's getting bigger. Okay, so if we're talking about muscle hypertrophy, that means that the size of the muscle is getting bigger. And there's two ways or 2 time frames that this can happen. We've got transient and we've got chronic. Now, with transient hypertrophy, if something's transient, it doesn't last very long, it goes away, that sort of thing. And so this is the hypertrophy that occurs immediately after exercise. And this is just due in large part to edema. So we've got fluid moving into the muscles. Okay, so we increase the amount of fluid in our interstitial fluid, and then as well as the amount of fluid in the intracellular space as well. But because it's transient, or not because it's transient, but we refer to it as transient because this only lasts for a short period of time. The fluid leaves these cells and interstitial fluid and returns back to the bloodstream. Okay, and so your muscles go from being a little bit bigger to not as big. Then we've got chronic hypertrophy, and this is what I think most people think of when they think of hypertrophy. This is kind of a long-term, longer-lasting sort of thing. And so this is what we get from long-term resistance training. Okay, so this isn't me going to lift one time. This is me going to lift many times over the course of several weeks, months. And what this does is this causes the actual muscle itself to change. So we're changing the proteins and the structure and the fibers within the muscle. And there's 2 mechanisms by which this can occur. We can have what we refer to as hyperplasia, or we can have what we refer to as hypertrophy. Okay. Now, it's also important to know that eccentric training is going to be what causes you to have greater hypertrophy. And as a result, we're going to increase our cross-sectional area. This is taking advantage of our cross-sectional area that we've already got. So, sorry, weird animation there. But there is a difference between hypertrophy and hyperplasia. So hypertrophy is where the muscle fiber itself increases in size. Okay? Hyperplasia, on the other hand, is where we increase the actual number of muscle fibers or muscle cells. Okay, one of these happens most of the time. One of these rarely, if ever, happens. Okay, and so when we're talking about hypertrophy, so we're increasing the size of those fibers, there's kind of 2 schools of thought. And the old school method was that you had to lift really heavy to increase the fiber size. New research has shown that you don't have to lift heavy, but you have to lift to fatigue. Okay, so that's the important part, is going to fatigue. So the fatigue is what will stimulate these the hypertrophy to occur, because what's happening is at the end, when you're fatigued, you're recruiting all the muscle fibers that are available. They're not able to do what you want them to do, and so structural changes are needed so that later on you can do that same thing. So if you want to get swole, as the kids say these days, I don't know if that's what you say. I know that I say stuff like that all the time. But if you want to get big, then yes, lifting heavy will help, but lifting to fatigue is the best thing. So we have this fiber hypertrophy. Now, generally speaking, the number of muscle fibers that you have is fixed at birth. So if you lose muscle fibers, too bad, so sad. You're not going to recover them. Okay, and so what happens is we take these individual fibers and we make them bigger. And this occurs due to the production of proteins, or protein synthesis. All right, and so there's several ways that this can occur. So we can increase myofibrils, we can increase the number of actin and myosin filaments. Remember, those aren't muscle fibers, but those are the filaments that make up the muscle fiber. We can have changes of the sarcoplasm as well as the connective tissue. All of these things will lead to a bigger muscle fiber. As a result, we have increased cross-sectional area. And remember, the greater the area, generally the more force we can produce. And in order to take advantage of this, remember that protein synthesis is increased after exercise, your body is in a state where it wants to kind of build up after exercise. And so you need to make sure that you have the fuel and that sort of thing to be able to do that. But that's more of a nutrition thing that we're not going to get into here. Now, there are several hormones that might play a role in this hypertrophy, such as testosterone, growth hormone, or insulin-like growth factor. But the research is a little mixed, a little unclear, but it doesn't appear that these hormones are super important in increasing muscle mass or strength. So if that's the case, then what's actually causing the muscle fibers to get bigger? And so if it's not a hormone, they think that there are signals coming from the muscle fiber itself, which to me makes sense that if I'm breaking down or using or stressing the muscle fiber is just going to have some sort of response that says, hey, we need to do better. We need to get bigger, faster, stronger, that sort of thing. So then we've got hyperplasia, which doesn't seem to occur. Now, hyperplasia is just an increase in the number of muscle cells. This does happen in animals when they have extreme or excessive, not excessive, but when they have extreme weight training or heavy training. It's unclear if this occurs in humans, and the reason that it's unclear is that it'd be very difficult to determine, but it does appear possible. But just like with these animal studies, it's going to be very heavy, very intense weight training. Okay, and so if it does occur, yes, it requires a lot of effort just to increase those number of muscle cells, but at the same time, you're still getting a benefit because you're experiencing that fiber hypertrophy. But how it could happen is that muscle fibers can divide into two, and then what happens is each of these then develops into its own muscle cell. Okay, and this involves something called satellite cells. Now, satellite cells, you can see from this diagram here, they're generally involved with tissue injury, or muscle injury, excuse me. And so what happens is you can see these these satellite cells, I don't know where my cursor went. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. But these satellite cells, there's an injury, and so then what happens is they go to the injured spot, they fuse to that fiber, and it ultimately helps stimulate the repair of that muscle fiber, and they can also form or cause, or they're helping with getting more nuclei there. Remember, skeletal muscles have more than one nuclei. They're multinucleated. All right. There's some other important things to consider when it comes to hypertrophy and the nervous system. Remember, everything's related. I think hopefully we got that point across with the cardiovascular adaptations to aerobic exercise, but even across systems. As we said earlier in this set of videos, the short-term adaptations likely come from nervous system adaptations. Okay, it's the longer-term adaptations that occur due to muscular changes. So really the way it works is you have a muscle fiber, it's gotten bigger, faster, stronger, but you need your neurons or your nervous system to be able to take advantage of them. And so this comes back to that recruitment, autogenic inhibition, all those sorts of things, so that I can take advantage of this increased fiber size. Okay, so once your nervous system is able to basically handle the new fiber changes, then the muscle itself will get bigger for up to a point. Then we have to have more neural adaptations. Then you have more muscular adaptations, so on and so forth. So it's kind of this cycle that increases hypertrophy and strength production, force production. Now, on the flip side, you can also have muscle atrophy. So just because I lift, and like I said, I've been doing that right now. Well, if I stop lifting, what's going to happen is I'm going to have muscle atrophy. Okay, and so basically it's the reverse of hypertrophy. If I stop training, if I stop having the stimuli needed to maintain that muscle hypertrophy, well, then the changes go away. And so then we get atrophy. Okay, and the easy way to see this, or a frequent way to see this, is if someone like breaks a leg, right? And that's not a good thing. We don't want anybody to break a leg. But you can see here on the right side, this person, on this leg on the right here, is much skinnier, less muscle mass than the one on the left. Okay, And this is likely due to the fact that this person, I don't know, this is just a picture I found, but if this person had broken their right leg and had been in a cast, they're not going to be able to use those muscles, and as a result, atrophy occurs. There's also something called detraining, okay? And so this is when training stops for an extended period of time, but it doesn't change muscle cross-sectional area. Okay, so there's a difference between detraining and then just lack of use, right? So atrophy is when you become immobilized, you don't use that muscle, the muscle goes away. Detraining is you're just not using as much, and so the cross-sectional area doesn't change, but what happens is you don't have that ability, the strength gains. And so what we think is occurring is your nervous system says, I don't need to use this. I don't need to dedicate or have the ability to recruit these muscles because I'm not in a spot where I need to recruit all these motor units. Okay. To prevent detraining, if you have what's called a maintenance program, that can help maintain strength gains, even though you're not putting in as much effort as you were to get to those strength gains. And so that's where we're going to end on the muscular adaptations to anaerobic exercise or resistance training.